24,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, a flight attendant is handing a drink to a passenger. It's a routine flight. She's done this 1,000 times before. Then, the roof of the airplane disappears. 95 people are now flying inside an aircraft that is missing its ceiling. One of them is about to be pulled out, alive, mid-sentence, mid-motion, and the two pilots flying this plane can no longer see half their own instruments. This is the story of how a 19-year-old airplane, flown thousands of times too many, almost took everyone down with it, and how two pilots brought it back. Before you see how this ends, hit subscribe, because what happened next changed the way every airline on Earth inspects its aircraft, and you don't want to miss how. April 28, 1988. Hilo to Honolulu, a short hop across the Hawaiian Islands, the kind of flight that barely gets above the clouds before it's already time to descend. Aloha Airlines Flight 243 was never meant to be dangerous. It was routine, boring, even. The kind of flight nobody remembers boarding. The aircraft was a Boeing 737, registration N73711, 19 years old. And in those 19 years, it had done something almost no other 737 in the world had done. It had flown short island hops over and over and over again. Hilo to Honolulu, Maui to Kona, Honolulu to Lihu, 20, sometimes 30 minutes at a time. Every single one of those short flights meant one thing for the aircraft's body, one full cycle of pressurization. Up in the air, the cabin fills with pressure. On the ground, it releases. Fill, release, fill, release. Think of it like a balloon, blown up and let down thousands and thousands of times. Eventually, even the strongest balloon gets tired. By April 1988, N73711 had completed 89,680 of these cycles, the second highest number of any 737 flying anywhere on the planet. Nobody on board that morning knew it. Not the pilots, not the flight attendants, not the 90 passengers settling into their seats for a short, forgettable flight to Honolulu. At 13:25, the aircraft climbed to its cruising altitude, 24,000 feet. Captain Robert Schornsteimer and First Officer Madeline Mimi Tompkins were at the controls. In the cabin, Senior Flight Attendant Clarabelle Lansing, a 37-year veteran of Aloha Airlines, was moving through the aisle, handing out drinks, doing what she'd done for nearly 4 decades. And then, at 13:46, it happened. A sound like an explosion. A rush of wind so violent it felt like the sky itself had reached inside the cabin. An 18-foot section of the fuselage, the entire roof, from just behind the cockpit to over the wings, tore away from the aircraft, gone in seconds. Passengers who had been reading magazines, sleeping, talking to the person next to them, were now looking straight up at open sky, at 24,000 feet, at nearly 300 miles an hour. Clarabelle Lansing, standing near row 5, handing a drink to a passenger, was swept out of the aircraft instantly. She was never found. Inside the cockpit, Captain Schornsteimer felt the aircraft roll violently to the side. His head snapped forward. When he looked up, the cockpit door was gone. He could see straight into a cabin that no longer had a ceiling. Alarms were screaming. Instruments that relied on the aircraft's electrical systems were failing, one after another. Wind noise was so loud, the pilots could barely hear each other, even shouting. And they still had to fly the plane. Captain Schornsteimer began an emergency descent, dropping the aircraft as fast as safely possible, trying to get to breathable air before anyone else lost consciousness. Or worse. First Officer Tompkins worked the radios, declaring an emergency, fighting through static and wind noise to get Maui approach control to understand what was happening 24,000 feet above them. Passengers held onto seat belts, onto each other, onto anything bolted down. Flight attendants, themselves injured, some bleeding, crawled through the aisle checking on passengers, trying to keep people calm in a cabin that was now, essentially, open to the sky. 13 minutes. That's how long it took from the moment the roof tore away to the moment the aircraft touched down at Kahului Airport on Maui. 13 minutes of flying a broken airplane with a missing roof, damaged controls, and 94 terrified people behind them. And they made it. The landing gear held. The wings held. Against odds that should not have existed, the aircraft landed safely. 94 of the 95 people on board walked away. So here's the question everyone asked after this. How does the roof of a passenger airplane just disappear mid-flight? The answer isn't a bomb. It isn't sabotage. It's something far more unsettling, because it could be sitting in any aging aircraft, waiting. It's called metal fatigue. Every time an aircraft climbs to altitude, its fuselage, the metal tube you're sitting inside, is being pressurized like a balloon. And every time it descends, that pressure releases. This isn't a one-time stress. It's a cycle. Up, down, thousands of times over an aircraft's life. Now, here's the part most passengers never think about. An aircraft's fuselage isn't one solid piece of metal. It's built from overlapping metal sheets, joined together, and glued in older aircraft like this one, at what are called lap joints. Over thousands of pressurization cycles, tiny cracks begin to form at these joints. Microscopic at first, invisible to the eye, but cycle after cycle, they grow. Investigators later found that N73711 had multiple site fatigue cracking along its lap joints, cracks that had gone completely undetected during routine inspections. Not because inspectors weren't looking, but because the inspection standards of the time were built around flight hours, not flight cycles. And that distinction mattered more than almost anyone realized. A long-haul aircraft flying 8 hours from New York to London accumulates flight hours fast, but very few cycles. An aircraft like Aloha's 737, flying 20-minute island hops all day, accumulates cycles at an extraordinary rate, while barely racking up flight hours at all, by every hours-based standard at the time. N73711 looked like a young, healthy aircraft. By cycles, the number that actually mattered for fatigue, it was one of the most stressed 737s on the planet. Nobody had connected those dots until this flight forced everyone to. The investigation into Aloha 243 didn't just explain what happened, it rewrote how the entire aviation industry thinks about aging aircraft. The National Transportation Safety Board's findings led directly to the Aviation Safety Research Act of 1988, passed by the United States Congress just months after the accident. The FAA launched the National Aging Aircraft Program, a complete overhaul of how older aircraft are inspected, with new standards built around cycles, not just hours. Boeing issued mandatory inspection directives for every high-cycle 737 flying anywhere in the world, checking specifically for the kind of lap joint fatigue that had gone unnoticed on N73711. Airlines were required, for the first time, to track and report cycle counts as a core part of aircraft maintenance, not just flight time. In other words, the entire framework for keeping aging aircraft safe exists in its current form because of what happened on this one short flight over the Pacific in 1988. Clarabelle Lansing remains the only person who did not survive Flight 243. A memorial garden was later opened in her honor at Honolulu International Airport, a quiet tribute to the one loss inside what investigators would later call a statistical miracle, because with a failure of this scale, a structural collapse mid-flight at cruising altitude, the outcome could have been so much worse. 94 people went home to their families that day, not because of luck alone, but because two pilots refused to lose control of a plane that, by every reasonable measure, should have been unflyable. Every time you board a flight today, every inspection, every maintenance check, every question an airline asks about how many times an aircraft has taken off and landed, some part of that exists because of Flight 243. That's the part people forget about aviation disasters. They're not just tragedies. Sometimes, they're the reason the next 100 million flights are safer. If you want to understand the real stories behind how aviation became this safe, the crashes, the near misses, the decisions made in seconds that changed everything, hit subscribe, because we're covering the next one very soon, and you won't want to miss it.